started like any other tense morning in courtroom 6B, the air thick with expectation, every seat occupied, every camera trained on the man who once ruled music and moguldom like a modern-day king. Sean Diddy Combs. But by 10:03 a.m., everything changed. The courtroom lights didn't flicker, the judge didn't bang the gavel, no one screamed. Yet the moment hit with the force of a grenade when the prosecution requested the court to play Exhibit 47C, and an audio file started rolling through the speakers. It wasn't just a clip, it was a moment frozen in time. Diddy's voice, unmistakable, low, aggressive, controlling, caught mid-threat during what prosecutors claimed was a recorded coercion session with one of the unnamed witnesses from the trafficking indictment. As the audio spilled into the room, the tension shifted from silent to suffocating. Jaws clenched, pen stopped moving, even the court sketch artist's hand trembled, because this wasn't speculation anymore. This was Diddy's voice allegedly confirming exactly what he'd denied for months. "You know what happens when people cross me," the voice on the audio said, followed by a laugh that didn't sound like it belonged to a billionaire. It sounded like it belonged to a man who believed he was untouchable. And then, all eyes turned, not to the prosecution, not to the jury, but to the defense table, where Diddy's lead counsel, the infamous Mark Agnifilo, sat frozen. He blinked once, leaned over to whisper something to his co-counsel, then stood up so abruptly the judge asked if he was all right. But he wasn't. Within seconds, he turned to the bench and made a request that no one in the room expected, not even Diddy himself. "Your Honor," he said, "I am withdrawing as counsel for Mr. Combs effective immediately." Gasps broke the courtroom's enforced silence, and Diddy, usually composed, masked, unbothered, looked up, mouth slightly open, blinking like a man who just realized the parachute wasn't opening. The judge paused, asking for clarity, asking if this was a strategic move or a reaction to the audio, but Agnifilo didn't elaborate. He simply added, "My conscience will not allow me to continue." That's when it hit. This wasn't just legal maneuvering, this was abandonment right there in the middle of the most high-profile celebrity trial in decades. His own lawyer, one of the most expensive defense attorneys on the East Coast, was jumping ship. And just like that, the narrative shifted. It wasn't just Diddy versus the government anymore. It was Diddy versus the truth, the fallout, and now himself. One audio clip, one moment of exposure, one lawyer walking out, and the courtroom was no longer watching a defense, it was watching a collapse. The audio wasn't fuzzy, distorted, or vague. It was clear, crisp, and damning. The kind of recording that doesn't leave room for context or confusion. And as it continued playing through the courtroom speakers, the sound technician didn't even need to adjust the volume because every single person in the room had already leaned forward, straining to catch every word. The voice, Diddy's voice, was unmistakable, low and deliberate, carrying an eerie calm that made the content of what he was saying even more terrifying. "Keep your mouth shut and you'll be fine," the voice growled. "I know where your sister lives." There was a collective inhale across the gallery, followed by a chilling silence, as the prosecution looked like they had just landed a finishing blow in a heavyweight title match. This wasn't speculation, this wasn't a third-party accusation, this was the defendant on tape allegedly threatening a witness, and it hit the courtroom like an earthquake. The judge's face tightened, eyebrows drawn down, eyes locked on the screen as if trying to process the shift happening before him in real time. Even the jury, trained and instructed to maintain neutral expressions, began exchanging glances, unspoken but unmistakably shaken. Then came the part that pushed everything over the edge. "You want your family to be safe, right?" Diddy's voice continued. "Then don't play games with me." No one moved. No one coughed. Even Diddy's entourage, who had been all confidence and coolness just moments before, looked frozen in place, as if hearing this for the first time and realizing there was no spinning it. This was not the Diddy of press releases and tailored suits. This was a man allegedly weaponizing fear, caught on tape doing exactly what the prosecution had accused him of for months. When the audio ended, the silence didn't break, it deepened. The prosecution didn't even speak, they just let it sit. Let the weight of that moment settle over the courtroom like a dark cloud. And sitting at the heart of that storm was Diddy, looking smaller than he ever had, shoulders hunched, lips pressed into a hard line, his usual swagger shattered into splinters. The judge finally cleared his throat and asked if the defense wanted to respond, but there was no response. Mark Agnifilo was gone, having walked out not just on his client, but on the case itself. The remaining co-counsel tried to collect themselves, but it was like trying to steer a ship after the captain had leapt overboard in the middle of a hurricane. The media outside the courthouse had already picked up on the drama, and reporters were scrambling to adjust their scripts because everything they thought they knew about this trial had just changed. Overnight, the public perception of Diddy went from embattled mogul to something far more sinister. That clip, the voice, the threats, the clear intent, wasn't just an exhibit in court. It was a turning point. It painted a picture that no amount of spin, legal gymnastics, or celebrity clout could erase. And the man who once made hits about being untouchable was now the most vulnerable person in the room. In the minutes after the audio played and Diddy's lawyer stormed out, the courtroom didn't return to business as usual, because it couldn't. The air was thick, almost chemical, and no one wanted to be the first to speak. Even the court reporter looked rattled, her fingers hovering over the keys as if unsure whether to capture the silence or the tension. What had once been a well-oiled defense strategy now looked like a sinking galleon, and the man once known for orchestrating billion-dollar business deals and commanding red carpets now looked like a ghost of himself. Diddy sat motionless, eyes fixed on the empty chair where his lead attorney had just been, as if replaying what had just unfolded in disbelief, or maybe dread. Because in that moment, it wasn't just that the tape had confirmed his worst fears, it was that someone inside his own camp had decided it was no longer worth defending him. And outside the courtroom, the ripple effects hit fast and loud. Within an hour of the audio leak, news alerts were flooding every major platform. Diddy's legal team implodes after damning tape. Lawyer quits mid-trial amid witness threat allegations. Courtroom chaos erupts. TMZ had a camera crew already outside the courthouse and caught the tail end of Agnafilo's dramatic exit, his face stone cold, lips sealed, swarmed by reporters asking what had triggered the sudden departure. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look on his face said it all. A line had been crossed, and he was not going to be part of what came next. Legal analysts scrambled to interpret what it meant for the defense. Some called it a crisis, others a death blow. One commentator went so far as to say, this isn't just a problem for Diddy, this is an extinction-level event for his entire brand. Back inside, the judge called for a recess and the jurors were escorted out with expressions of disbelief still etched on their faces. Even the bailiff looked stunned. Meanwhile, Diddy's co-counsel, a younger, less seasoned attorney who had mostly stayed in the background, now found himself thrust into the role of lead defense with absolutely no preparation. He fumbled through his briefcase, flipped pages with trembling hands, and tried to summon the kind of composure one needs when defending a client whose voice had just been heard threatening a witness on federal audio. But it was clear to everyone watching that the tide had turned. There was no recovering the narrative, not anymore. The fortress had been breached, the moat drained, the walls collapsing one by one. And if that wasn't enough, news broke that the prosecution had more tapes. Yes, plural. The audio that played in court was just the beginning. Sources close to the case told CNN and Rolling Stone that at least 2 more recordings existed, both obtained through court-authorized surveillance, and both allegedly featuring Diddy making veiled threats, issuing coded instructions, and coordinating efforts to handle witnesses. Suddenly, this wasn't just about what happened in one courtroom on one afternoon. This was about a pattern, a strategy, a system. And if those tapes said what prosecutors claimed they did, then Diddy wasn't just in trouble, he was cornered. Word also leaked that at least one member of Diddy's inner circle had flipped. A former associate whose identity was being withheld for safety had provided damning corroboration to the feds, reportedly confirming that Diddy had used third-party intermediaries to reach out to potential witnesses, even after being explicitly warned not to. The witness said Diddy never believed the law applied to him, and that he always thought money could fix anything. But money couldn't fix this. Not now. The court of public opinion was already boiling, social media in a frenzy, hashtags like Diddy trial and audio leak trending globally. Within hours, companies that had once partnered with him were issuing quiet statements distancing themselves, an endorsement deal gone, a licensing agreement suspended. The silence from his industry peers was even louder than their previous support. And as Diddy sat in that courtroom with his world unraveling, all he could do was wait for the next tape, for the next witness, for the next betrayal. Because this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was the fall of a fortress that had stood untouchable for decades, and it was happening one brick at a time. The prosecution didn't waste time capitalizing on the momentum. The very next morning, they returned to court with the second audio file queued up and ready. The courtroom was packed, press, sketch artists, and observers with courtroom badges that had suddenly become more valuable than gold. People weren't just attending a trial anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning in real time. And when the clerk pressed play on the second recording, the room went so silent it felt like everyone had agreed without a word to stop breathing. The voice that filled the courtroom was unmistakable. Raspy, deliberate, full of that too cool bravado that once sold platinum albums. But this time, the words weren't lyrics, they were commands, directives, threats. You make sure she knows what's on the line, Diddy's voice said flatly. If she opens her mouth, I'll ruin her. I don't care what I gotta do. A gasp escaped someone in the gallery. The judge banged the gavel, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Every juror's eyes shot up as if they needed to physically see the man behind the voice. It wasn't just aggressive, it was surgical, calculated, It sounded like someone used to getting away with everything. What followed was even more damning. In the audio, Diddy named names: a former assistant, a publicist, even a family member who was supposed to get a message to her. The implication was clear. This wasn't just a man angry about accusations. This was a man who was orchestrating an underground campaign to dismantle the case against him. The prosecution let the silence hang for a full 10 seconds after the tape ended. Then the lead attorney, without even looking at her notes, said, "This is not a misunderstanding. This is not a breakup gone wrong. This is organized obstruction of justice." Diddy's reaction? Stillness. Total stillness. The kind that doesn't come from peace, but from paralysis. His hands were locked together on the table, his mouth twitching slightly. But he didn't look at the jurors. He didn't look at the judge. He stared straight ahead like a man watching his own reflection crack in slow motion. And that's when a ripple went through the press section. His former PR manager had just posted a cryptic message on Instagram. Just one word: enough. That was it. No caption, no tags, just white letters on a black background. But the timing was damning, and the internet took it as a signal another one close to him was jumping ship. Outside the courtroom, protests began forming. Activists, survivors, and former fans held signs reading "Believe Black Women" and "Money Can't Silence the Truth." One woman yelled into a megaphone, "We danced to his songs while he was destroying lives. No more." News helicopters hovered above the courthouse. Aerial footage showed a scene that looked more like a national scandal than a celebrity trial. And inside, the jury was watching everything. Not just the tapes, but the implosion of the man once considered untouchable. Back in the courtroom, the judge ordered a short recess. But the energy didn't dissipate. Reporters rushed to the payphones to beat the Wi-Fi dead zones, typing headlines into aging keyboards with shaking fingers. Defense co-counsel looked like he'd aged 10 years in one day. And Diddy's former stylist, seated in the third row, quietly slipped out the back. Another silent defection in a case that had already lost too many defenders. When court resumed, the prosecution delivered their most surgical blow yet. They laid out a timeline showing how each of Diddy's moves coincided with filings, subpoenas, or witness interviews. "This isn't coincidental," the lead prosecutor stated. "This is calculated. This is criminal." They then showed a list of digital transfers from an account linked to Diddy's mother, small payments to anonymous shell companies tied to alleged witnesses. The courtroom collectively leaned forward. This wasn't just a scandal, it was starting to look like a criminal enterprise, and the prosecution was slowly connecting every dot. In response, the defense scrambled to pivot, but with no lead attorney and no strong rebuttal prepared, their attempt fell flat. They argued that the audio was taken out of context, that it lacked timestamps, that maybe the voice wasn't even Diddy's, but no one was buying it. The jury's faces said everything. They'd heard the voice, they'd seen the fear in Cassie's eyes, and now they were watching a man unravel in public, stripped of his lawyers, stripped of his image, and maybe soon stripped of his freedom. Outside, the headlines were unrelenting. Diddy's empire crumbles. Second tape confirms. Witness tampering. Judge weighs contempt charges. But perhaps the most piercing headline came from Variety. Bad boy for life? Not anymore. By the fifth day of trial, the courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a graveyard. Each bench a pew, each witness a pallbearer, and Diddy himself sitting in the casket of his own legacy, still breathing but already buried in disgrace. No camera crews were allowed inside, but the energy leaked out through transcripts, through whispered phone calls, through viral tweets that made headlines before they even finished loading. Everyone could feel it. The walls were closing in. And then the prosecutors dropped a hammer that made the gallery flinch. "Your Honor, we intend to play one final audio recording. This one, from April 2024. This wasn't some archival snippet from the heyday of Bad Boy. This was recent. Too recent, and that's what made it dangerous." Diddy's remaining lawyer, a junior associate whose name no one even knew last week, tried to object. Relevance? Inadmissible, prejudicial, but the judge had had enough. "You had your chance," she said, voice firm. "We proceed." The clip began with faint background noise, a car, maybe a private jet, but then came the voice again, low, almost slurred, but chilling. "She's not gonna talk," Diddy said. "Not unless she wants her mama to lose that house." Gasps, audible gasps, because this wasn't just a threat. This was blackmail. It wasn't about discrediting a witness anymore. It was about dismantling their entire life if they dared to speak. The room shifted. One juror rubbed his temples. Another leaned back, arms crossed. The courtroom sketch artist stopped drawing, just stared. Even the stenographer paused, blinking like she couldn't believe what she had just typed. Outside, Twitter caught fire. Inside, the prosecutors let the silence marinate, let it soak into the walls, let it break whatever illusion of innocence remained. When the audio ended, Diddy's remaining legal team asked for an emergency recess, not to regroup, but to request to be recused. The junior associate looked like she had aged a decade since the morning. "I can't represent someone who intimidates witnesses like this," she whispered. The judge nodded. Motion granted. And just like that, for the first time in this case, Diddy was officially without legal counsel. The judge ordered a 48-hour stay so Diddy could secure new representation, but the damage was done. Cameras outside caught the exact moment the news broke. Reporters sprinting to the curb like someone had fired a starter pistol. Diddy's entire defense team has now withdrawn, the headlines read. Audio blackmail bombshell, legal earthquake. The judge's stern warning echoed through every legal blog and primetime analysis. This court will not tolerate obstruction, intimidation, or criminal conspiracy masquerading as strategy. What came next was even more surreal. Without an attorney to advise him, Diddy was forced to stand and address the court. His voice cracked. "Your Honor, I didn't mean for it to come off like that." His statement hung limp in the air. No apology, no remorse, just a last-ditch attempt at damage control from a man watching his empire erode in real time. The prosecution stood immediately after. The defendant, the lead attorney said coldly, isn't sorry for what he did. He's sorry he got caught. And then she laid it out. The timeline, the threats, the money trails, the coded messages, the house, the mother, the silence. "This isn't just a fall from grace," she said. "It's a blueprint for abuse, for corruption, for unchecked power gone septic." In the back of the courtroom, Cassie's husband clenched his fists. Other survivors began to cry, not because they were sad, but because someone was finally saying it out loud. Loud enough for a courtroom to hear, loud enough for America to hear, loud enough that even Diddy couldn't drown it out with money or music or manipulation. One particularly damning point emerged when the prosecution pulled up a financial audit showing that just days before the trial, a 7-figure payment had been wired through 3 separate shell companies into an account linked to the family of witness 3. That witness had recently recanted their statement. Coincidence? The prosecutor asked, or coordination? No one answered. They didn't have to. Diddy slouched lower in his chair, eyes flicking toward the press box like a man scanning for exits. There weren't any. Not anymore. And the defense's chair? Empty. Just like his excuses, just like his credibility. When the trial resumed 2 days later, the energy in the courtroom was noticeably different. Not louder, not calmer, just heavier, like the air itself was made of concrete and every word spoken had to punch its way through it. Diddy now sat alone at the defense table, flanked only by 2 federal marshals, his once flashy entourage gone like a mirage. No one from his team had stepped up to replace the attorneys who quit. It was an unprecedented silence, and it screamed guilt louder than any testimony. But what broke that silence wasn't a lawyer, wasn't a judge, wasn't even a prosecutor. It was a woman in a navy blue pantsuit, standing at the witness stand with her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her name was redacted in all court documents. To the jury, she was only known as witness number 4. But to Diddy, she was the moment everything unraveled. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She didn't fumble with her words. She was calm, precise, unnervingly composed as she described a night in 2015 when she said she was invited to a private recording session at one of Diddy's homes in the Hollywood Hills. At first, she said it felt like a party. There was music, there were guests, there was laughter. But then, she said, the doors were locked, the security changed shifts, and the music cut out. From that moment, everything turned clinical, cold, like being in a lab, she said. He didn't want music anymore. He wanted obedience. She claimed she was given a drink she later learned was laced with crushed pills. Then came the male escorts. The lighting changed. A man in gloves handed out towels. Another held a camera. Diddy instructed me where to sit, she testified. He gave specific orders about where my hands should go, where my eyes should look, what words to say. And then she stopped, just for a breath, and then said he told me it was a loyalty test. The court was dead silent. No coughs, no shifting, just the hum of electricity in the walls and the rapid clicking of stenographer keys. When the prosecution asked her if she had ever told anyone before, she nodded. 2 years ago, I told my therapist. I also told his assistant. That's when the black SUV started parking outside my apartment building. She brought evidence, photos, time-stamped messages, voicemails from a block number that said things like, "We see you, and let's not make this messy." She kept it all, every scrap of it. Her voice never wavered. She ended her testimony with one line that made the courtroom exhale all at once. This was never just about sex. It was about control, about watching us disappear. Cassie, seated just behind the prosecution table, lowered her head, eyes wet. Other accusers in the gallery began to cry. The prosecutor stood, gently thanking the witness, but it was the jury's faces that told the real story. One woman in the back wiped her eyes. A man in the front scribbled something furiously into his notes. The defense, still absent, had no cross. The judge turned to Diddy. "Do you have any questions for the witness?" she asked. Diddy stared ahead, jaw tight, eyes bloodshot. "No," he said. One word, barely audible, like the air was choking him. As witness number 4 stepped down, the prosecution introduced something else, a chain of internal messages from one of Diddy's companies, suggesting that legal funds were being used not just for his defense, but to investigate and monitor past employees and accusers. He wasn't just preparing a defense, the lead prosecutor said. He was building a surveillance network. They called it Project Loyalty. Emails referred to specific individuals as threat assets and disruption targets. The language was sterile, corporate, but the intent was unmistakable. The prosecution then played a brief clip of one more audio file, this one from the same home security system found at Diddy's LA mansion. In it, you could hear a muffled voice, believed to be Diddy's, instructing someone to vet her family and check if she has student loans. As if financial pressure were just another tool in his arsenal of control. Reporters outside were already dubbing this the Cosby tapes too, but this wasn't just about reputation. This was racketeering, abuse, surveillance, manipulation, bribery, and now, according to federal officials, possible witness intimidation in real time. The courtroom was no longer just a courtroom. It had become the excavation site of an empire built on silence. And Diddy, he sat motionless, a king without a kingdom, a mogul without a machine. The press took note that, for the first time since the trial began, he didn't bother to check his reflection in the water bottle, didn't smooth his sweater, didn't try to make eye contact with the jurors, because there was nothing left to salvage. The courtroom was already frayed. The tension stretched so tight that even the whisper of paper turning could be mistaken for a scream. But when the prosecutor clicked play on the final audio file of the day, everything broke. Not with a bang, not even with a gasp, but with an eerie silence so complete it felt unnatural, like the air had been sucked out of the room and replaced with dread. The voice was unmistakable, gravelly, confident, authoritative. It was Diddy, mid-conversation, recorded clearly despite the faint hum of background speakers and a rustle of movement. But it wasn't the clarity that made jaws drop. It was what he said. You make her feel like she's choosing it. That's the game. Don't force it. Just make her think there's no other option. The courtroom froze. It wasn't just a damning admission of manipulation. It was strategy, planned, refined, weaponized. That single sentence didn't just imply coercion. It declared it. It was as if someone had reached into the trial, lifted the curtain, and revealed the man behind the mask, a mogul who turned emotional warfare into an art form and had the audacity to coach others in it. The prosecution didn't add commentary. They didn't need to. They just let the audio play. A second voice, male, deferential, replied, "Got it." And the blonde from last week, there was a pause. "She's not gonna talk," Diddy's voice said flatly. "Her mom owes that favor. That's covered." In 2 lines, the narrative shattered. This wasn't a troubled artist, a flawed man wrestling with impulse. This was systemic. A network, a structure. You could feel the jury lean back, like they were trying to physically recoil from what they were hearing. Even the court stenographer paused, pen hovering midair. The judge called for a recess, but not before turning directly to Diddy. "You will remain seated until the jury exits," she said, and for the first time her voice trembled, not with fear, but with disgust. Outside the courtroom, the news hit like wildfire. Twin threads erupted. Legal analysts abandoned neutrality. "This isn't just evidence," one headline read, "it's a confession." And it wasn't just the public reacting. Back in the hallway, 2 of Diddy's longtime associates were seen leaving without comment, refusing even to make eye contact with reporters. His remaining PR team issued a statement an hour later saying they were reassessing the communication strategy. But that was code. Everyone knew it. They were jumping ship. Inside the holding cell beneath the courthouse, Diddy paced in circles. According to a guard who later spoke anonymously, he spent hours muttering to himself, asking to review footage, questioning whether someone had bugged his studio. The paranoia had sunk in. Deep. Not because he was being framed, but because he'd been caught in the very web he designed. By evening, prosecutors filed an emergency motion for court protection of witness number 4 and 2 other unannounced witnesses whose names were allegedly mentioned in the full version of the tape. Federal agents were already dispatched to confirm safety protocols, and the judge scheduled a special hearing for the next morning. But that wasn't even the biggest shift of the day. At precisely 8:03 p.m., Diddy's new replacement attorney, appointed just 72 hours earlier, walked into the press room with a statement typed in courier font on plain white paper. Due to irreconcilable ethical concerns surrounding the contents of the newly surfaced audio, the statement read, "Our firm will be withdrawing from representation effective immediately." That was the second lawyer to walk out in under a week. No firm wanted their name attached to this case anymore, not because they were afraid of losing, but because they were afraid of what winning might cost their souls. The term used in legal circles now was radioactive. Every second on that tape, every syllable, was another nail in the coffin of a reputation that had already been cremated. And what about Diddy? He requested to speak in court the next day, not through his lawyer, not through his press team. He wanted to talk directly directly to the judge. Whatever he was planning, redemption or retaliation, wasn't going to be rehearsed. Not anymore. The mogul who once curated every beat, every image, every word was about to speak raw. But Cassie would be there. So would witness number 4. So would the jury who had just listened to the man say, in his own voice, how he turned pain into a performance. And the whole world, they wouldn't be waiting for an apology. They'd be waiting for the moment a fallen empire finally collapsed beneath the weight of its own truth. It was the first morning where Diddy didn't arrive in designer shades or a tailored coat, but in the standard issue beige of the federal system, and something about that absence of luxury made everything else feel louder. The protesters chanting outside, the helicopters hovering for aerial shots, the reporters whispering theories in line at the metal detectors, all waiting for a courtroom that had suddenly become ground zero for the collapse of celebrity invincibility. The bench was full. The jury sat stiffly, eyes already heavy with everything they had heard. Cassie, radiant but restrained, sat beside her husband in the gallery, her hand curled tightly around her belly. The judge entered. The gavel dropped. Then, like a man preparing to walk his own plank, Diddy stood. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at Cassie, and then he started talking. But what came out wasn't what anyone expected. No legal strategy, no denial, no sob story about trauma or pressure or misunderstood genius. Just a slow, stammering admission, not of guilt, but of collapse. I spent my life trying to control everything, he said. Music, people, rooms, reactions. I thought power would protect me. I thought money would buy silence. I thought fame would erase shame. He stopped and looked down at the floor, his voice barely audible over the humming lights. But now all I hear is my own voice on that tape. And I can't justify that. Not anymore, gasps echoed. One juror instinctively covered their mouth. The judge held up a hand for silence, but even she looked shaken. Diddy didn't say he was guilty. He didn't need to. That courtroom had already made up its mind. He continued. I don't know how this ends for me, he said, his voice cracking, but I know it has to end. And just like that, he sat down. No fanfare, no monologue, just a man finally out of line to spin. His legal team didn't stand up. They had already resigned. The judge called for a 10-minute recess to confer with federal authorities on whether that counted as a statement or an admission. But by the time they returned, it didn't matter, because outside those doors, the entire world had already made its judgment. News outlets had broken the story within moments. Diddy breaks down in courtroom, one read. Celebrity implosion captured live, said another. But Cassie, she didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just breathed. Because this wasn't a victory. It wasn't vindication, it was exposure. It was the moment where secrets stopped being whispered and became undeniable. As the proceedings resumed, the judge announced that an emergency hearing was being scheduled to address whether Diddy's statement constituted a partial plea. Federal prosecutors confirmed they were reviewing additional audio files found on a private cloud account handed over by a former employee who, until now, had stayed quiet out of fear. But the fear had shifted. Because Diddy was no longer the untouchable, he was the defendant. By sunset, TMZ released footage of celebrities entering their buildings in silence, dodging cameras, refusing questions. The ripple effect had begun. Music partnerships were being pulled, fashion lines disassociated, streaming services paused all bad boy content indefinitely. Even former collaborators were distancing themselves. The walls weren't just closing in, they were crumbling. And in one of the most viral clips of the day, a street mural that once celebrated Diddy in Harlem was covered in gray paint by locals who said he no longer represents us. As night fell, a statement from Cassie's team was released. It wasn't long, just one line. Let the truth continue, and it will, because now the floodgates are open. Now witnesses who were too scared are stepping forward. Now the game Diddy once controlled is playing without him. The spotlight he once bathed in now reveals every shadow he tried to hide. And the final verdict, it may come from a judge and jury, yes, but the real judgment, it's already here. Written in headlines, etched into silence, etched into every victim who now walks a little taller. The empire fell not with a bang, but with a voice, his own, played back like a ghost refusing to stay buried. And in that courtroom, in that moment, power changed hands, not to lawyers, not to labels, but to the truth. And now, nothing will ever be the same. If this story shook you, don't stay silent. Share it, speak up, and stay tuned for more revelations. Click on the video showing on your screen now for the next chapter in this ongoing trial of truth.